when we get hurt, we tend to respond in anger, and many times hurting parents hurt their children because they're still so angry at their ex.
Right, right.
And that's in the bigger picture. You know, I try to remind parents that if your child had cancer, I know you would want to know the research, you'd want to know the statistics, you'd want to get ahead of it to figure out how to slow that cancer down. And so what I tell parents that are especially really still angry and hurting is that your children can have emotional cancer after divorce or not. And when we stay in that place of hostility and anger and unresolved stuff between mom and dad, that on the long run will really impact our children in a negative way. So I get a lot of, honestly, as a counselor, I get a lot of moms who come in and they think, hey, she's a female therapist, I'm gonna go tell her, and we're gonna stick it to him.
Yeah.
And actually, they're sometimes disappointed because I challenge them that no matter how bad he was as a husband, no matter what mistakes he made, your children still need the freedom to love him and to enjoy a relationship with him if he's safe and if he's healthy.
Right, right.
And so in some cases, and there's a couple chapters in the book, we talk about, you know, co-parenting. What if my ex is unsafe? Because certainly some families come through abuse mentally and physically. And sometimes, you know, one or the other parent just checks out. Sometimes you're co-parenting alone. So we dig into those deep topics, but in general, we try to help parents understand the difference between a co-parent who's unsafe or who's angry.
Yeah, oh,
and
that's
try to
so
help
good.
the parents get
That's
past that
so
anger
good.
so that their kids don't have to carry that forward.
Yeah, I've had to also deal with some people who had the dad who couldn't move on. And so then the mom was this, that, and the other, you know, growing up. And so as adult children, they struggle with relationships with their mom. And so, and of course, this is vice versa. It goes all the ways. But you mentioned the cancer that the child, emotional cancer that the child can experience. But when do parents get to the point where they say, okay, I need to deal with this?
Sure. Well, I always say, no matter what, even if you're cooperative and you're getting along as you divorce, we all need to handle our stuff.
Yeah.
And so I really encourage parents to get some counseling, to go to divorce care, to enlist some 3 a.m. friends, people that will walk with them through the journey.
Oh, I love that.
Not just be the yes person,
right,
you know, or adding to the angst, but the person who really is a safe, healthy person to say, hey, I'm hurting, hey, I'm really angry. I see my former spouse is getting remarried and moving on with their life, and I'm really struggling. We need people to walk that out with, because if we do it in isolation, we can get stuck.
Okay, so you have the co-parents. You have one parent who is willing, the mom, let's just take for example, she wants the ex to be involved with the children, but the ex chooses not to be. How can she handle that?
Sure. Well, a big part of being a healthy co-parent is just having a healthy mindset, because we can't control the other person. You know, we can't make them get involved, we can't make them respond or stop being negative if that's the case. But how we handle it is probably 70 to 80% of how it will impact our kids. So for the parent, either side, mom or dad, who is dealing with a really angry ex who continually degrades them, maybe undermines their parenting. You know, if they have boundaries at this house and the other one says, oh, you don't have to do that, you don't have bedtime here, you don't have to do your homework. Mom says this, well, I say different. For those kinds of dynamics, I say to the one who is willing to stay in the lane of being a healthy, stable, engaged parent, still giving your children the freedom to love the other person and not adding to the angst is important, but then helping your children recognize that sometimes there's going to be differences. At mom's house, we have these boundaries, and it may be different at dad's house. And not that we're okay with it or we think that's the best way, but we really can't control that other environment unless it becomes a safety issue. You know, I always put that asterisk there. If we have to know our children are physically and emotionally safe at the other house, but often parents kind of play war with each other through bedtime and access to computer and
Yeah.
digital
Yeah.
games, you know.
I want to
trying
be the favorite.
Exactly. And the favorite is not always the healthiest mindset
Right.
in co-parenting. And so to the one that's dealing with somebody who's really angry, who's difficult, who you know is putting you down behind your back, I just say take the high road. Keep taking the high road and don't add to the junk with your children. Don't badmouth them.
Yeah.
You know, don't
Yeah.
badmouth the other parent to your children. Still say good things about that person to your children, their characteristics.
Sure, there has to be a good quality somewhere.
Yeah.
You stayed with that person, right? You fell in love with that person.
Sure.
Concentrate on those things.
And that's tough, and that's a very selfless, intentional decision.
Yeah.
And I also tell parents, a lot of what is healthy in co-parenting isn't always what's said, but what's left unsaid. Because sometimes we could have a long list of how come to tell our kids about maybe a pattern of behavior, a situation that's difficult. We could easily say, well, it's because your dad or it's because your mom, but that's not helpful. And so we always try to bring back to center what is going to help the children heal, what's going to help them grow into a young adult who's going to
Yes.
emerge and have a healthy, hopefully lifelong relationship of their own. And I'll give you a really quick story of someone named John Trent. He's a national speaker. He's an advocate for healthy marriage. He's probably written a dozen books on healthy family and marriage. He's from a broken home. His dad left when he was 2, and he never met him again till he was in his 50s. Well, his mom always spoke well of John's dad to him. She told him good things about his character. She also talked to him about her hope for John to have a lifelong marriage, even though she couldn't be the example. She upheld that as the goal. Well, John met his dad later in his life, and he came back to Mom and said, Mom, why did you always tell me all this good stuff? You told me my dad, you know, had a Purple Heart Award in the military. He won certain awards. You always told me the good stuff. And John tells this story actually on our video curriculum. So on his behalf, I say, he told his mom, I found out he was a chain-smoking, angry alcoholic. He wasn't all those good things. And she just said, John, as you grew up, I always knew that when you looked in that mirror, you would see 2 sets of jeans looking back at you.
Oh, wow.
She said, I wanted you to know the very best things about your father so that you could feel the best about yourself. So your self-esteem and your identity as a young man would not be impacted by that negativity. So she chose to pick out the good stuff, even when
Wow.
she could have easily
Wow.
said all the negative. So having that mindset that whatever I do and say is always about my children's best outcome, not necessarily always what's fair and what's true, but what's for their best outcome, hopefully will filter out some of that stuff.
Well, and she was speaking those things that aren't as though they were.
Yeah.
You know, something else that children deal with, they deal with the breakup. They feel rejection. And a lot of times during the struggle of the marriage or the relationship, they lose that intimacy with the usually the father, the dad. And then the dad goes into another relationship where there are already children there, or they have more children.
Sure.
How do you suggest that's
Well,
dealt with?
We try to encourage step parents when you're building a blended family, step family, whatever you want to call it, your next family. The children are not going to necessarily see that in the same way you see it.
Right.
So maybe it's mom that's already, you know, maybe she's a couple years divorced, she's dating somebody and he has kids. Even if she has her children full time, her own biological children, they may sometimes start to feel like, well, do we still matter? Mom's so happy with this new person and this newer family. So no matter the circumstances, we just try to remind moms and dads, when you move on and you start dating, and you bring other adults and other children in the picture, don't forget to make sure you still have a deep, intentional bond with your bio kids. That if you are remarrying, and especially for the parent that doesn't have the children as much time, you know, the smallest amount of time, when they do come to visit, don't lose sight of who they were to you before the next family came. Doesn't mean it's all or nothing, but to let yourself still have maybe a date day with dad or a date day with mom. Because often kids, you know, on the outside, they're trying to, enjoy it, and they probably do.
Yeah.
But there's still a part that wants to be seen and heard, and know that they still matter most in the big picture as all the families are moving forward. So, and we're in a blended family. My husband, Jay, he lost his first wife in a car accident. So 11 years ago, their mom went to heaven. And so as I married Jay 8 years ago, 3 kids, we blended 4 total. I wish I had known to make sure that they spent a lot of one-on-one time with their dad. They loved me. I mean, the oldest wrote a song for the wedding. They were all excited about it, and there was such sweet bonding that happened, and yet they still longed for alone time with their dad. And that happened once in a while, but with such a busy family, I wish if I had those first 2 years to do over, that I would have really made sure that he spent one-on-one time with each of them on a regular basis. So every family is different.
Yeah, sure.
And but slowing down and making sure what's happening to the children initially as we divorce, because they're all going to react and adjust differently, and then what happens if we start dating, and then if we do consider remarriage, how does all of that affect our kids? And sometimes some people will tend to jump into rebound relationships right away because they're hurting, and the first person that comes along and notices how pretty she is or how handsome he is, it feels good to be loved again. But don't forget that your kids need time to adjust to all of that.